Hi, welcome to Get Lit. My name's Pete Crooks, and I'm senior editor and senior writer at Diablo Magazine. On Get Lit, we meet here at the Walnut Creek Public Library, and we meet with authors, writers, artists, and talk about the creative process and also the value of public libraries. We have a real treat today. We have author Tamim Ansary, and he has a absolutely fascinating book here, Games Without Rules, The Often Interrupted History of Afghanistan. First of all, welcome to Get Lit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming out to Walnut Creek.
Thank you.
Okay, so this book is an absolutely fascinating historical account of, and the often interrupted history is such a terrific tagline. It's so intriguing. Can you talk about the process and the content of what you've got here?
Yeah, I wanted to emphasize just as much the history of Afghanistan as the often interrupted, because the point I wanted to make is we hear about the interruptions. We only hear about Afghanistan when someone's invading it.
Right.
And what I wanted to do was tell a story that shows that it has its own story that's going on between the invasions and interruptions.
Right.
It's ongoing, and there's an interweaving between the two stories. The story of Afghanistan itself and the story of these interruptions that are really a global story.
Right, the world coming in and saying, well, this is what we're going to do in Afghanistan. And
Yeah.
then creating chaos while daily life is going on and generations are living and experiencing day-to-day life.
Yeah, and I think it's not so much that great powers say this is what we're going to do to or with Afghanistan. Those interruptions are always great powers having a wrestling match with other great powers.
Right.
And Afghanistan just happens to be the place where it happens.
It happens to be right in the middle of it.
Yeah, so there's weeds and grass and stuff. It gets trampled.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so you were born in Kabul?
I was born there in 1948.
Please tell us about your childhood and life in Kabul.
Well, Afghanistan has gone through a lot of change since I was a kid. When I was a kid growing up in Kabul, it was a small city, maybe 150,000, 200,000 people. Very few cars, a lot of horses on the street still pulling two-wheeled carriages. That's how people got around mostly. Everybody lived in these compounds with high walls. We did, others did. Most families in the city had some kind of roots in a village someplace. We did, many people did. Life was very unexcited, or I don't mean not exciting, but it was very calm, and it was very intimately sociable. It's like what people did mostly was socialize with other people of their clan, tribe, and then there was the life of the bazaar outside where the public, the men met there and the women were inside the compounds. And that's how that's how life was then.
And what was the bazaar like? There were food and goods and
the bazaar was consisted of room-sized stalls, any number of them. A big bazaar would have just like 100 of these, one after another, and many of them were bazaars that sold an assortment of stuff. Often, if it was a food place, there would be trays arranged outside with heaps of, pistachios, pine nuts, oranges, apples. Inside you went in, it was like, what do you got? Matches, thimbles, thread, gunpowder, marbles, toys, whatever. You'd have to look around.
And was there significant farming in the area for the food?
Yeah.
A big farming community?
People got their food from the nearby communities. The farmers brought it in. My own village, our village, the Ansary village, about 10, 20 miles from the city, entirely grapes. That's what we grew there. And most of them were sold in Kabul. So,
was there winemaking, or there's no drinking because
there was no drinking.
Right.
There were a few people drank,
right,
but it was a very private sort of a, it was sub rosa.
Okay.
So
it was under the table, undercover.
Right.
Right.
And in fact, there wasn't. Of course, there were no bars, but there were also really no restaurants that much or anything like that. There were tea houses that were for travelers more. You didn't go out to eat. Eating was something you went to some other friend's house, or you had them over.
Communal experience, family or friends.
Yeah, socializing was entirely like that.
Wow. And again, like I'm sorry that my whole window pane of reference is The Kite Runner and books and films that I've seen fairly recently, but I am fascinated by the kite hobby that kids had. And you said that you would fly kites, and it was just right outside your door every Friday?
Yes. Where I lived, right outside my door, there was a big, empty, open field. Some Fridays, it would be full of nomads. They'd come into town, so the whole place was full of camels, black tents, the nomad dogs, and so on. But most Fridays it was empty. Then people were out there flying their kites. Now, I flew an occasional kite myself. Kite flying was as you know from the Kite Runner, it was a competition. It was a sport. It was not like fishing. You were out to get the other guy's kite. I never got another guy's kite, you know. But I did sit in the back room there with the glue and the ground glass, trying to make my string be lethal. Right. And we all made our own kites. Yeah. So.
It just sounds like such a creative, exciting hobby, and it was kind of neat that it was every Friday afternoon in the week. That was when everybody gathered and fought kites. Yeah. One of the producers and I were talking about growing up here at Walnut Creek and going to Mission Control Video Arcade. I think that was our version of that.
Yeah, for sure.
So you came to the U.S. in your teens as a teenager?
Yeah, I was 16. I came here and finished high school.
What was your impression of the American culture from Kabul? What was your exposure to the U.S. and what brought you here?
Well, for me personally, there's two monkey wrenches in the works. Okay. One is that my mother was American. Okay. Yeah. She was in fact the first American woman to marry an Afghan and live in Afghanistan. So my
first ever?
Yeah, the first ever.
Wow.
So my whole growing up was slanted by the fact that I was the son of this woman everybody knew about. This marriage.
A bit of a celebrity from.
I don't think celebrity is quite the word here.
Was that not seen as a good thing that there was an American?
Well, it was odd.
And so, did you have U.S. citizenship as a child because of your American parent?
As it turned out, yes. You know, many years later, my mother decided to try that out. She went to the embassy. Do I still have my citizenship? Yes. What about these guys? Yeah, them too.
Great.
So I had the citizenship. But then the other thing was, when I was a teenager, or just before, preteen, we moved to a little town called Lashkargah, and that was a 8 square blocks modern city built by the government more or less overnight, and half the people were Americans, half were Afghan, because this was the nerve center of a big American-funded development project. Okay. So I grew up there. I went to school with Afghan guys at night. We socialized with the other Afghan families. Right. But I also hung out with the American kids. Okay. And so I knew, you know, I felt like I knew all about American life.
This is like early 1960s?
Yeah.
So did you have like Elvis records and...
We had Elvis records.
Ricky Nelson records and...
Ricky Nelson, you know, and Kisses Sweeter Than Wine. I remember that. We had get-togethers, we called them, parties, dance parties, you know, the American kids. And we would dance. I knew how to cha-cha-cha and so on. But outside that little bubble of an American community and the larger Afghan community, there was no mention of that, no hint of it. Right. We
it's like a secret world.
Yeah, it was a secret world.
That's fascinating, isn't it?
So when I came here, I thought I knew all about it, but it turned out, no, when I was here, now I was this oddball Afghan kid, you know.
Yeah, you didn't feel like an American when you got here.
I felt alienated. Interesting. And it took me a while to figure out how to be here.
So you landed near Aspen, Colorado when you came to the U.S.
Yeah.
And why Aspen?
Well, there was a private school there called Colorado Rocky Mountain School. Okay. They had one of the American kids I knew had been sent there by his parents, and he told me, hey, you know, you're an exotic Afghan guy. If you apply, they might give you a scholarship. I did. They did, and I was like, wow, okay, I'm going.
Wow. And so, what's the elevation in Kabul? Is it a mountainous?
Yeah,
area?
The elevation is maybe 5,000 to 6,000 feet.
So, Colorado is actually a pretty relevant place to go.
Pretty similar, yeah.
Interesting.
Pretty similar.
So then what was your take on you've been to like Elvis dance parties in a tent, and then you're in Colorado, and then your family spread out to different parts of the states, Tennessee and
yeah,
where
all
else?
over the place.
So did you go sort of visit all these places and explore America on that as a family experience?
Not as a family experience. No, I was a road tripper. So
right. Nomadic, solo.
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of. When I was in college, I decided to see if I could hitch across the continent, leaving the house with $5 in my pocket.
Awesome.
So I left my house in Portland and just struck east, and I made it.
Right in the backseat with Jack Kerouac kind of thing.
Yeah. So there, and I've been to the South. I've probably Oklahoma and maybe one other state are the only ones I haven't been to.
What was the weirdest experience hitchhiking across? You must have met some real characters that picked you up. Who drove you, like truckers or?
Some of them were truckers. Yeah.
Truckers are a pretty interesting world.
Yeah, as a hitchhiker, I got picked up by just all kinds of people.
Right.
The most interesting one, I got a 1,000-mile ride from one guy who I was a long-haired hippie. This was a guy who really was down on hippies. But I had been on the road for such a long time that my hair was as greasy as could be, and I'd combed it back, and he didn't know I was one of those people that he feared and hated.
Right.
And
you look like a student council member when in fact you were an undercover hippie?
Something like that.
That's awesome.
He was a mechanic and, working class redneck guy who, as a college student, I would have said, oh, these guys beat us up. I would have been afraid of him. Right. We spent 1,000 miles together. He was a good guy. We became good friends. Right. And when he stopped for me, I got into his car, and he was like dazed, and I thought he was getting set to beat me up. But then he shook himself awake and he said, I just drove 1,000 miles to give a ride to a beautiful woman with a 200-pound dog, and I never even got her name. I'm in love. And she was a hitchhiker. He picked her up in Toronto. He was on his way to work. He said, where are you going? She said, this place. Right. He said, I'm going there too.
That's wild.
And then he picked me up and took me back to Toronto.
I can't imagine. Are there still hitchhiking adventures going on? I think there must be.
Not like that, I don't think.
Fish concerts and stuff. I think there's some of that. But that was a pretty exciting time. Very easy rider. Did you see Two-Lane Blacktop? Did you ever see that film? It's the only movie that James Taylor acted in.
No, I've heard the name.
It's a great movie.
I better get it on Netflix.
Yeah, it's on Netflix. It's a great movie. All right, so let's get back to your book.
Back to this.
Right. What was your interaction with Afghanistan when you came to the States? Did you go back to visit, or were there huge periods of time where you were just in the U.S.?
Well, for the probably the first 10 years or something that I was here, there were no other Afghans in the States. The Afghans there were in and around Washington, D.C. They had something to do with the diplomatic corps. So by then, my mother was living there. I'd go back in the summers, and we'd see some Afghans then.
In D.C.?
Yeah, in D.C. Rest of the time, it was American world. Then, in the mid-'70s, right about the time when I was thinking, maybe it's time, I'm going to go back, there was a coup d'etat, and things looked a little dicey. Right. So I said, I better wait a little. Things didn't get better. In fact, then the communist coup d'etat occurred. Things got worse. Then the Soviets invaded.
Soviets was like
Civil
1980, right around then?
Yeah, 1980. They were fighting them till 89. Then the Soviets started pulling out, but then there was a civil war that was just really even more brutal. Right. And then that ended with the Taliban. And then, so, there was like 25 years when it was like, no, you're not stepping foot in that country. Now, I've been back twice in the last 10 years. Okay.
So that sounds almost like existentially brutal to know that your home city is so unsafe, a place that you played with kites every Friday afternoon, went to the bazaar, and then there's, Soviet tanks rolling through and Taliban leadership. What was in your American experience, what was that like to know that you were, like there was literally a wall that you couldn't, you go back to your home?
Well, there was a period, probably at the height of the Taliban era, when pretty much like all Afghans here, most of the Afghans who were here at that point, there were lots of them, were refugees from the Soviets, basically. They came in 80, 81,
Right.
82. And for a long time, everybody was like planning what they were going to do when they got back. By the peak of the Taliban era, that died away. I think people started to feel like we're never going back.
It's not worth it.
Yeah. So, and I felt that, you know, and I didn't feel a connection to the country. You know, I felt a connection to the Afghans who were out here.
Sure.
And I really didn't know what was going on in Afghanistan because most of my relatives were out. My father had passed away. So all I saw were like images in the news, and there weren't many of those.
Right.
You know, and then the events of 9/11 happened. The United States went in, they toppled the Taliban, and so immediately after that was the first time for me that it was safe to go back.
Optimistic.
And I went back in 2002. The fighting had not really ended, you know, and when I went, nobody could really tell me what do you do when you get in Kabul. Is there a hotel there? Are there buses? How do you get around? I didn't know. All I knew was I had one cousin still living there, and there were no street addresses in Kabul in my day, so I just knew it was near the old Soviet bagel factory, bread factory. When I got to Kabul, by a circuitous route, you know, I had to go to Delhi. There was only 2 flights in a day. But when I got there, there was like it was teeming with cabs. There were more cabs than in New York City.
Wow.
You know, in New York, somewhat you have to go and try to get a cab.
Right.
Here, you had the cabs came at you, and so I immediately got a cab. I told the guy, look, this is all I know about the place I'm going. You think we can find it? He said, yeah, why not? Sure. Bread factory, I know where that is. So we went there. We saw some familiar landmarks. Then we just started asking people, hey, anybody know where, Aghay Mir Aminuddin, my uncle, where he used to live? He's passed away now. People said, oh yeah, it's around the corner, 2 blocks up. I went there, you know, we took that little course. The moment we got out and I looked at that door, it was like, it hasn't changed. This is that house, of course. I was at a wedding just before I left, and it felt like that was 2 weeks ago.
And how many years was that?
It was about 38.
Oh my goodness. So this 38-year lifetime of the American experience, did you travel all over the world as well, or were you mostly in the States?
I did some traveling. Right when the Iranians took Americans hostage in '79, I went on an adventurous I was going to get the story of the Muslim world, and I traveled across North Africa and Turkey.
When were you writing all along? Have you always been writing?
I've always been doing some kind of writing. You know, I worked in a newspaper for a while. I edited a publication for the Asia Foundation about Asian art and politics.
Right.
Then I was in educational publishing for a lot of years.
Okay.
So
you had the idea of how to put a book together and had a journalistic training from your...
Yeah, I was a writer from the beginning. I was never much of anything else. So,
right. So Destiny Disrupted was a huge breakthrough book for you, wasn't it?
No, actually, West of Kabul, East of New York was the huge breakthrough.
Okay.
That I published right after 9/11. And that's kind of like the personal story of being bicultural, the divided life. Destiny Disrupted was a much bigger sort of epic idea. And the idea was, even though we see each other on the same room and in the same stage, the whole world looks different depending on where you were born and where you grew up.
Sure.
It's not the same history, even though it's the same events. You know, so I decided to say, if you grew up someplace between Istanbul and the Indus River, if you're in that part of the world, what is your sense of world history? What has happened so far, and how did we get to where we are today?
Wow.
And it's not the Greeks, the Romans, the Dark Ages.
Right.
The Dark Ages is actually the Bright Ages. That's when the Muslim Empire was the civilizational capital of the world. So
Right.
it's a whole different kind of
Entirely different realization of history and
Yeah.
perspective on it. So you've got these two books. One is a personal memoir, right,
Yeah.
of your own experiences, and the second is this very ambitious sort of think piece about
Yeah.
the historic experience for an individual. And then you've got this book, The Often Interrupted History of Afghanistan, Games Without Rules, which is extraordinarily ambitious because you're telling the continuous history of a country that has these intersections and footnotes of extraordinary change.
Yeah.
Yet life goes on day
Yeah.
by day for villagers and families. It's just that 10 years ago there were Kite Fridays, and 10 years later there's Soviet tanks running through, and 10 years after that there's Taliban.
Yeah.
I should not paraphrase your book. I'd like to hear your initial ambitions and how you put it together.
Well, one thing I want to say is the Destiny Disrupted and this book, and the memoir, you know, epic think piece perhaps gives the wrong impression because I think of myself as a storyteller.
Okay.
And I think of, and I'm a historian too, but my sense of history is that the narrative approach to history is the most illuminating one. And my ambition in Destiny Disrupted and in this book was, look, if we're just sitting around and you ask me this question and I just told you what I know about it, this is what I tell you. So I try to get that you and me sitting around the table talking feel. Which
is very accessible.
Yeah.
And extremely appreciated, because I certainly remember when the U.S. went into Afghanistan in the end of '01, beginning of 2002, I realized, like, I have no idea what's going to happen over there. It's too far away from my education and interest. I'm removed from it. And then I would start seeing on Sunday morning shows like names of U.S. soldiers who were killed in Afghanistan, and I was thinking that person's life history connected with Afghanistan and tragically.
Yeah.
So it's so helpful to somebody like myself for you to open these windows as to what the cultural life experience and the history is.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that approach that you're doing of making it a coffee table conversation rather than a academic history, is, you know, a comfortable way to do it, and probably much more effective.
I mean, since we're talking about Islam and Afghanistan, I can't say you and me having a beer. But the thing about Games Without Rules is, you know, the only thing we hear about Afghanistan for the most part is this many soldiers killed, the Taliban blew that up, and so on. And I feel like I have this longer, deeper sense of Afghan history. And one of the things that I'm caught up in telling the story are the fascinating sort of gargantuan personalities that have marched across the stage of Afghan history. And you know, in some cases, they're so colorful, some of these.
Give us an example of one of these great characters who, especially when you're researching and reporting and writing a book like this, these characters live in your mind before you can share them with us in such a daily, you know, overwhelming kind of way, and then you have to get that story out so you can share it. Can you give us an example of one of those great characters? Well,
you know, one great character, pivotal fellow in Afghan history, was the guy who negotiated the borders of Afghanistan with the British. It was the British were fed up with trying to conquer Afghanistan. They said, please, could someone please take this country? This guy said, I will. And then he went into a room just himself with the you know, foreign minister in charge of those things for Britain, and they said, well, where should the line be? And the guy said, how about here? And our king said, fine, but you can't come across that line, and I won't try to invade, or you can have my foreign policy, but whatever I do in my country, that's mine.
The literal line in the sand, right?
Right. So he was like this pirate, and he set about subduing the country, and he fought 40 tribal wars in 20 years and won every single one of them. he had, you know, prisons, and you know, he had many kinds of torture things.
Jeez. So he drives this line and he says, okay, you guys go over there, I'm going to turn around and just dominate and annihilate life and culture over here, and
right.
everybody lives under my fist.
Right. So that happened, and then
what year is this? What?
He was between 1880 and 1901.
Oh, and what's his name?
His name is Abdurrahman,
okay.
but commonly known as the Iron Amir.
Okay.
You know, right. Somebody showed him a telescope, said, "Look, sir, you can see the moon with this." He said, "What do I care about the moon? Now, if this thing could fire bullets, I'd be interested."
Wow.
So now we come to his grandson, who becomes king, and you know, right after World War I. And that guy is a revolutionary, social, progressive guy who changes things. And he decided, I'm abolishing the veil, I'm setting up a secular school system, I'm writing a constitution, I'm marrying the daughter of the famous Afghan intellectual, I'm going to make her the Minister of Women's Affairs, we're going to go travel in Europe. And he tried to transform this country overnight. Lo and behold, he's toppled by a guy who's never been to a day of school. He's got a big beard. He's made a name for himself as a highwayman, and he gathers a bunch of other thugs together, and they take Kabul.
So that was the effect of that totalitarian kind of power play that the first king had, was that it indicates that, okay, let's build our own little army here, and then
yeah, you know, the first king, he subdued the country. So then for 20 years, he died, but then it was possible to build power plants. It was possible to, you know, build roads. It was possible to build a postal system, right. Put in lights, all these kind of modernizing things, right. That just were not possible before this guy, right. were possible after him. I mean,
and did that happen? Did that
all happen?
Right,
yeah.
Right. And so you're born in '48. So how when was that third king, who the progressive king?
The third king was in he was 18 to 29, 1918 to 1929. My father was born right at the start of his reign.
Okay.
And then he initiated the idea of sending a few chosen smart kids abroad to get university Western education, so they come back and build up the country.
Wow.
After this spot of bother when the highwaymen took over, things were disrupted for a few years. But when they started it again, my uncle was part of the first crew that went out, and then my father was third or second or third, fourth, you know, early on. So he was one of 5 that was sent to the United States. And
goodness.
So these were some of the.
And he met your mom in the U.S.?
He met my mom in Chicago, and he married her, and the government said, "We warned you about that. You're not supposed to marry American woman. You have to come back." He said, "Okay," and she said, "I'm going with you."
Wow.
So she came back.
What a great story.
Yeah.
And in writing and researching the book, what resources did you use to illuminate all these fantastic characters?
Well, I read a whole bunch of books, some of them in Farsi, Afghan writers, some of them British writers, some of them American writers. I also talked to people I know, and I drew on what I knew from growing up there. The thing is, you have a base laid in for writing a book like this for an American audience. That's why I could write it in a year. You know, the year was just the extra research because I already knew the basic story.
Interesting.
And you know, I've been giving talks about this kind of stuff for 10 years, ever since 9/11. And that finally I decided, look, I'll write a book and
materialize it into a solid volume. Well, congratulations on the book. It's a tremendous amount of work and much appreciated on the U.S. side of this experience, because I think it's really important to illuminate what life is like there. I think that's going to help everybody, you know, move forward as we go through a very, very challenging experience.
But not a tremendous lot of work to read the book. You have to
Right. No, it's like I said, it's not a graduate level thesis kind of
this book
academic
practically
piece.
reads itself.
Yeah, it's very exciting, and it's amazing that your own life experience, your family, actually intersects with these great characters.
Yeah.
Well, again, Tamim Ansary, what a tremendous achievement this book is, and your first two. So congratulations on that, and thanks for all you've done. You're a great part of our community, and really appreciate you coming here to Get Lit.
Thanks for inviting me.
Right. And thank you at home for watching Get Lit. This has been a real thrill to talk to Mr. Ansary. Please tune in. We have all kinds of authors, writers, and artists coming by the Walnut Creek Public Library. Make sure you use the public library. It's here for you. And thanks for watching.